Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to Press for Truth TV. Today is Tuesday, September the 4th, 2012. Thanks so much for joining us once again today. We have a special guest on the line today. We're going to be speaking with Mike Stafford, owner, founder of NAU Resistance.org. May sound familiar to you. And that site now brings you to his new website, NAU News.org. So Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today at Press for Truth TV.
No problem, Dan. Thanks for having me on. It's definitely an interesting topic you've chosen today, and I thought I'd step up and, share some of the research or some of the information I've happened to come across in the few years of covering the topic.
Well, I've been paying attention to your site for years, and I would often refer to a lot of the articles that you post when I'm doing my own research into the NAU agenda. So for anybody out there who, first of all, just might not have heard of your website or not be familiar with the work that you've been doing, why don't you just tell us a little bit about how you got started and what NAU.org is all about for you?
Sure. Well, I first started off researching some of the buzzwords the American politicians were throwing around at the time about a new world order, a new type of global government system that was, taking shape. And I asked a pretty defined question on how do they plan on implementing a new world order. Okay, it was fine that they were going to do this and that they were slowly sort of introducing people to the idea, but my main interest was how do they plan on accomplishing it, both legislatively, legally. How do they build this foundation to create this new world order? What are the pieces of the puzzle that they had to put together in order to realize their idea? And that's when I came across some of the films that you guys were producing at Press for Truth. Some of them touching on the early films that you produced, touching on the topic of North American Union. And it became fairly clear to me right away that North American Union is definitely one of the major pieces of the New World Order puzzle as far as creating a one world global system or one world government, or as Mr. Harper would like to refer to it as global governance. It definitely would have to be accomplished by them in order to create this one world system. When you think of a one world system, it means one. Excuse me. So in order for them to create this one world system, I think one of the baby steps or a stepping stone in that direction would be to create a North American Union. Now, if they could get Canada, Mexico, and the United States to harmonize and integrate or to consolidate North America, that would make it a whole lot easier to eventually converge all these sort of unions of nations like the European Union to eventually come together. So that's where my interest came in as far as the topic. I almost everything I do is from a North American Union perspective. On the website, on our social networking sites, the videos that we put out on YouTube are all sort of focused on how they are going about assembling this North American Union, which again is a stepping stone to a bigger plan, New World Order or our global government.
That's right. This whole agenda does play into a far bigger picture of the eventual one world government. And as you said, they need to get other small regions together first as to kind of create the building blocks to be able to merge them all together into the new world order, one world government. But as you said, focusing specifically on the NAU agenda, as you and I know, they've been working at this incrementally over the years. We know through various trade deals over the years, and things have been escalating more and more lately. I think it took a turning point in 2005 when we saw Paul Martin signing the SPP, and from there on, going from the SPP to the North American Leaders summit, and now we have things like the Beyond the Border plan. What's your take on some of the latest kind of incremental steps that they've really been pushing lately as far as integrating Canada-U.S. authorities at the border and those sorts of incremental steps? What's your take on their approach there?
Well, if looking back on the SPP days, the CFR and the CCCE in Canada released, or they were part of a task force that created a document on called or titled "Creating a North American Community," and in that document they listed some very specific goals, and a lot of those goals have come to fruition. They've managed to accomplish them. As far as the common security perimeter deal, that is a stated goal in that document that they handed over to the SPP to use as a framework on how to create this North American community. The goal was to create a common security perimeter, and the main deal with that is that they need to thin the borders. Basically, the corporate Canada, or the CEOs that make up the CCCE, feel as though our borders are basically a stumbling block to trade. They can't move their products and goods over the border fast enough. It's costing them money because of different regulations in Canada, different regulations in the United States. They have to have two separate types of inventory, maybe one that satisfies Canadian standards and another that satisfies American standards. So in order to cross the border with their products, it becomes a bottleneck, basically, especially with the strength of our dollar right now. A lot of Canadians are hopping the border to go shopping and things like that, and that's really tying up transportation. So the idea was to basically thin the borders. There's a lot of media attention on things that seem to thicken the borders as far as security measures and things of that nature. Intrusive searches, things like that at the border when you're crossing over that seem to take more time right now. But they're actually implementing things that as part of this program to eventually thin that out and eventually to dissolve the physical border between Canada and the United States. Mm-hmm. And how they plan to accomplish that is they've already set us up with an RFID type driver's license, which is acceptable identification at the border if you have the enhanced version. Mm-hmm. The enhanced version of the Ontario driver's licenses contain biometric information and RFID information, which can be used to streamline the process of getting people and goods across the border. And this also ties into what a lot of people were talking about back in the day about a NAFTA superhighway. Right. Right now in Winnipeg, they're busy building the what's called Centerport Canada. It's a it's basically Canada's hub for the NAFTA superhighway, the one that Harper and his friends from the United States basically said didn't exist. They claimed it as basic conspiracy theory or something of jokes. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, several years later, they announced Canadian taxpayer funding to create this port, which is basically, like I mentioned, our hub that's going to join with this NAFTA superhighway. And
for anybody who may not have heard of the NAFTA superhighway, what does it amount to basically? What exactly is that all about?
Well, it allows trucks and other rail systems and basically commercial travel, and eventually will facilitate public travel as well. Mm-hmm. But in the beginning, it's mainly meant for commercial shipping. Right. That can go from as deep south as Mexico, right, through the United States all the way up into Canada, with only having to be inspected at customs once. So that's something new that they're working on right now, and they're pushing for, is they want to be able to just inspect cargo once, right, and allow it to go through two international borders without being inspected again.
And of course, this is all under the guise of making trade more easily flowable across the border, right? It's supposed to be benefiting people.
Exactly, and you would think it would. I mean, it sounds like a decent enough idea. And I mean, if you're trusting your trade partners to implement proper security measures, then you would hope that you could send, goods and products over the borders without having to duplicate all these services. However, we're in a time when they're trying to convince the public that we are under some sort of external threat to terrorism and this sort of thing, which is why they're implementing other measures. Like in the United States, you have the TSA at the airports,
right.
Homeland Security, all these new roadside checkpoints and things like that. So on one aspect, they're telling us that we're in some sort of danger that they have to protect us from, but in another sense, they're saying that checking cargo only once, let's say in Mexico, and then coming up in through the United States and Canada without being re-inspected is somehow going to make us safer. So in one area, they're trying to implement very strict security policy, especially when it comes to human beings. And in another, with commercial shipments and goods, they're basically opening up the doors and saying, come on in.
Right.
Without re-inspection. That's something that's just recent, and that's what they're working on right now.
Yeah.
So this, in order to create or to finish off this NAFTA superhighway, there's one problem that they're having, and that is the ability for American customs officials to make arrests deep within Canada and
right.
vice versa. Like you have established at the airports, you have laws and legislation set up already to allow those officials to be within Canada and to do their agent duties at the airport.
Right.
Where for transportation hubs and this sort of thing, inland port systems, they don't have the legislation and laws set up to allow American authorities to be on Canadian soil and also affect arrests here. That is the next step, basically, what they need to do. And you see pilot projects that they've already launched to sort of march us in that direction. You have the Shipwriter program that allows Americans to make arrests in Canadian waters. And they just announced in Fort Erie they're building a sort of like a harmonized infrastructure where Canadian and American officials will be based out of for port authority and that sort of thing, as far as boat travel and checking boats, basically, for in the guise of stopping criminals and drug dealers and that
right.
sort of coming across international waters.
It almost feels like it's another incremental approach, just to suggest that it'll only be water-based at first, for example.
Right.
Knowing that maybe the Canadian people would not be okay with seeing American authorities on Canadian soil. Maybe they'll just test the waters, so to speak, by doing it in the waters first. And that's how they achieve these things, is by doing them incrementally. And a lot of times the people simply just don't take notice.
That's right, because a lot of these programs that they are putting together to further integrate Canada and the United States, on the surface they may seem like very logical ideas. I mean, both of us work together anyways on security initiatives and things like that.
Right.
But where it starts to get a little bit questionable as far as protecting Canadian sovereignty is when it comes to the legislative process on how they implement these programs. How do they make those programs carry the force of law? It's one thing for an agency of the Canadian government to put a sort of pilot projects together and try them out and work together on certain things, but it's another to when it becomes law, and that's where the harmonization and integration actually takes place, because Canada will adopt American standards and rules and regulations very easily, because through the history of Canada, we've always been trying to sort of please our American neighbors.
Yeah.
And right now they're at a heightened security sort of level where, because of 9/11 and that sort of thing, and a lot of that is justifiable as well, but it's almost like our Canadian politicians are very very easy to influence and adopt American standards without first thinking of a Canadian solution or what's best for Canadians.
Right. Well, we know that the end game here is a trilateral union, but it seems lately the focus has been more on a bilateral union, and it appears to me that a lot of the focus has been on getting Canada and U.S. together and possibly including Mexico in the talks later down the road. What's your opinion on that? Do you think they're focusing more on the bilateral approach now, with the hopes of including Mexico later, or is Mexico in on it right now?
The way I see it happening right now is the bilateral negotiations between Canada and the United States are sort of up front and center. I think they've realized that when we start including Mexico into the mix, a lot of people start flaking off. They don't want to get too involved with Mexico because of, again, what we see in the media, the influence of drug cartels in Mexico. It's a somewhat unstable country that a lot of corporations can't rely on as far as security and that sort of thing. So, but what's happening now is Canada and Mexico seem to be working out their deals, while at the exact same time, the United States and Mexico are working out their deals. So instead of doing it all together like the old Three Amigo summits, they're now concentrating on splitting it up, I guess, to possibly divide our attention or to not make it so obvious that this is what's happening. But I can assure you that it's all three countries are in the mix. Early last year, Prime Minister Harper and the President of Mexico were in Canada, and Prime Minister Harper announced that Canada and Mexico are as one. So that also jumps over the United States and creates more harmonization, which they called for, deeper integration, and the consolidation of North America. That was right in our parliament where they announced that, which was very shocking to hear from your Prime Minister, that Canada and Mexico are as one, and they're calling for the consolidation or the further consolidation of North America. Mm-hmm. Now, there's not too many ways you can try and explain something like that without getting people like me excited about sovereignty issues and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it seems that there's just constantly things popping up that would put Canadian sovereignty in jeopardy. I mean, we have recently Harper signing on and agreeing to join in with this Trans-Pacific partnership. Do you see, this might be slightly off topic, but in regards to the TPP deal, do you see that playing into the NAU agenda in any way?
As far as, not directly, but I can see how that would work for what their next step would be.
Right.
As far as once Canada, Mexico, and the United States are consolidated, this frameworks like the TPP will sort of be a bridge product to get them towards consolidating the global system that they're trying to accomplish.
Right.
So I don't see that. It is definitely a concern, and we cover that on our website and in our Facebook groups and things like that. The TPP is definitely something that we're keeping an eye on. It seems like they're working on all fronts, basically. Whether or not they go straight to a global governance type system before NAU is fully implemented, or North American Union will be implemented, followed very quickly by the consolidation of the global system. So it's hard for me to tell if the North American Union will be long-lived if it does become a reality. I think they have much bigger plans, but that would be the marker or the indicator that they're fully on board and ready to go for the world consolidation. They're already putting together the legal framework for global governance and encouraging lawyers and things like that, constitutional experts, to take on the cause of international law and things of this nature. There's a lot of our or I should say retired Supreme Court judges and other lawyers are involved in federal, a world federalist type system where they're putting together international law that will apply to Canada. And we all know that when these people retire, they tend to stick around and influence our current government with sometimes great influence. And it's more often than not that what they're pushing for still to this day seems to get passed. And so definitely something we're keeping an eye on. It seems to be happening, like I mentioned, on all fronts. They have obviously lots of resources, lots of people under their wing that can tackle this project that they're trying to put together from almost every angle.
Yeah, like you said, there's so many different aspects of this agenda that need to be looked into in order to have a solid understanding of just what they're trying to put together. I mean, it's almost kind of overwhelming at first. Where would you suggest people look if people are just learning about the NAU now? Maybe let's just say hearing about it for the first time today. What would you suggest people? Where's a good place for people to go to learn more about this agenda?
Well, first I would suggest they pick up a copy of your DVD, United We Fall, and Nation's Deathbed was also a very good example of some of the incremental steps that they're taking. It demonstrates what the general idea of North American Union is. I'd also recommend very heavily for every Canadian, whether you're really interested in North American Union or not, is I have it right here actually. It's a book called The Fight for Canada. It's by David Orchard, and it actually documents right from the very beginning of Canada the agenda to annex us to the United States. It's been something that's been in the works even before 1867 when Canada was founded. It goes through the steps in our history of how the Americans have been in our system or in our country influencing our government all the way along, and they haven't stopped up into this day. They're obviously better funded and more sophisticated and have a lot bigger backing from the globalists these days, but it's definitely a book that would give the North American Union some great perspective. That it's built into our system of government, our country, our heritage. That Canada was basically founded to resist American expansionism. So that tells you something right there. Our Constitution basically is the solution to North American Union, because North American Union is unconstitutional. So if Canadians are interested in this topic, it really does help to have an understanding of how we got to this point, why these things are important to resist, to speak out on. What are the solutions to stopping it, to driving a wedge in it? And that's basically my focus on North American Union is basically my answer to what can everybody around the globe that's aware of the New World Order agenda or the One World Government agenda that know about this are probably asking themselves, and many are doing things, thank goodness, taking steps and speaking out. And but everybody, in my opinion, should try and do what they can from where they are, in the country that they're in. And one of the things that we can do to stop the New World Order agenda, because we already established that North American Union is a stepping stone in that direction, is to stop North American Union. If you can stop North American Union, you can stop their New World Order agenda. They can't have a one world government system if they can't get Canada, Mexico, and the United States to consolidate. So that, to me, by definition, is not a one world system when you have separate, independent, sovereign nations. And, you know, there's a lot of activists and very well-meaning people that see these things, traditional things, as being part of our problem. You know, national borders, nationalism in general, because they've been so warped and distorted by the people using, or the people that we're fighting against are using these tools to lure people in and giving them false sense of direction. But to me, national sovereignty, national borders provides freedom of choice. If we eliminate national borders and nation states, and we're under a one world type system, where can you go at that point to escape tyranny? Where on the planet do you expect to go to get away from laws and government that you can't seem to live under? Having these international borders and being sovereign, you have that freedom of choice. It may not be great, but it definitely gives you an option or an out. Refugees come to this country because they're escaping the tyranny that's happening in their country. So they have an option to get away if they take that step. Nobody wants to think about having to do that, but it's an example of what I'm trying to say as far as eliminating the freedom of choice under a one world global system. Sovereignty, when looking at it at that way, becomes a good idea.
Yeah, no, that's such a good example with people, escaping their countries to find a safe haven. I mean, that's the beauty of national sovereignty, and like you said, I mean, it's almost like I don't know, people tend to think that, well, why don't we want to erase the borders? Can't we all just get along? Don't we want to just be one big happy family? And a lot of people have a hard time understanding that it amounts to the centralization of power into fewer hands, and that just gives so much more power and control to the puppet string pullers, the global elite, who are setting up this new world order system. So absolutely, right. I think maintaining national sovereignty is absolutely key to being able to stop this whole thing from being put together.
Exactly, and I don't buy into the belief that with national borders and sovereign governments or sovereign countries are standing in the way of us working together as partners in projects and common goals and aspirations with other countries. I don't see us having to give up national sovereignty and the ability to self-govern in the best interests of Canadians, or, if you're looking at it from the perspective of another country in their own best interests. To let borders get in the way of that is just basically a cop-out, in my opinion, that's put forth by these people who sort of, make it, for the government, for example. Most of the people you talk to on the street will say they don't want war, they want peace. But yet, and then in the country that we're supposedly going to war against, if you talk to the people on the street there, they also are saying the same things. We don't want war, we want peace. Right. But why is it that our leaders basically march forward and do the exact opposite of what the people are saying? So it's not in relationship to that with the borders as being the demon of, we need to erase that and get rid of that. It's the people that are, the government that is using that, not in the way, I would just say to their own advantage, making it look very ugly. Whereas if you look into the good of it, like I said, it provides freedom of choice. And freedom of choice is great. Under a one world government system, that freedom of choice is removed. You don't have anywhere to go. Everywhere on the planet will basically be under one type of law or legal system. And that's why national sovereignty and national borders are important, in my opinion, from a North American Union perspective. That's, and that's exactly what they're trying to eliminate, are those borders to create this North American Union. Right now, you're seeing the borders being dissolved slowly, incrementally. They're pushing the inland checkpoints in the United States. You're seeing a lot of information coming out where they're checking citizenship, 60 miles, 80 miles away from the border inland, because what they're trying to do is reduce that bottleneck at the border and start doing citizen checks or, immigration enforcement basically well within each country. We don't see so much of that in Canada just yet, other than our typical police programs that they have out there like RIDE and that sort of thing. Right. But what they're now equipped with our driver's license and the ID system that was implemented and requested by the United States is the ability now to eliminate the border, because with that ID you have all your information is on there, basically your citizenship information, your threat assessment profile, biometric information. So your ID, your simple driver's license now contains all that information, and it's as basic as a police officer, whether they're in the United States or Canada, being able to scan your information. So in fact, they now are becoming sort of immigration enforcement as they dissolve the borders. The technology is in place. They throw up red herrings where every once in a while in the media where they say, we're going to build a fence between Canada and the United States, that sort of thing. And then, everybody gets upset, oh, we don't want a fence. Okay, well, we have the solution for you then. Take this ID system and we don't have to have a fence. Right. And if we want to check who you are. Well, actually, with this new ID system, and the Common Security Perimeter deal, they've called for the tracking of all travelers in real time. So right. That's a stated goal. So this is the technology that will allow them to dissolve the borders, and basically, to me, with that and harmonizing and integrating our national defense. We have the F-35 program they're putting together, or the planes that they're planning on purchasing. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of that deal is based on, or the cost of ownership of that deal is based on how far we integrate together with the United States, that program. Naturally, Canadians are going to demand the best possible deal on these planes if we're stuck buying them. They're going to hold their government accountable and say, you better get us a cheaper deal on these planes. But really, the way that they're planning on implementing or getting those deals is by further integrating training with the United States. The fact that we're going to be using the same planes is going to make things cheaper. So you can see how integration is tied deeply into that, and it's almost a knee-jerk or a natural reaction of citizens or Canadians to want the best value for their dollar. Except for they don't understand that, in order for them to bring value or get a cheaper deal, it's going to cost us a lot as far as sovereignty and that sort of things go.
Absolutely. Well, I know the Canadian military recently announced that they intend on spending possibly upwards of $1 billion on, speaking of new technologies at the border and integrating everything there, is drones, and having these new unmanned drones patrolling the border. And it really does seem that the focus on destroying the national sovereignty of Canada and the U.S. is happening at the border right now incrementally. That's where the lines are being blurred, if you will, is currently at the border. So no doubt that's something for anybody who's paying attention to the NAU. You have to be well aware of what's going on at the Canadian-U.S. border.
Right, they're definitely combining and harmonizing. Just recent reports in Fort Erie I mentioned, and also there's talk of high-speed rail projects between Canada and the United States. Obama and Harper entertaining the idea of having bullet trains going from Quebec to New York City without having to stop for passport or in that
Really?
sort of inspection. Yeah. And again, a lot of people are demanding higher speed rail or better public transportation and things like this. So it becomes dangerous because most people will demand it, and they want to sort of upgrade their infrastructure in their cities and things like that. But how they're doing it is through, or I should say, attached to those type of deals are the integration and harmonization scheme that they're pushing forward.
And that's just it. It is a scheme. They're so sneaky, and the way that they slip these things in there, doing it incrementally, very, very sneaky at the way they're trying to put this thing together. Again, is all the more reason why we have to continue to expose these agendas that they're trying to put together. The fact that they are trying to put together a North American Union agenda is something we really have to continue, as you said, to make Canadians aware of. It seems that there's not still a large amount of people who are not aware that this is even taking place. So that's why I think it's important for websites like yours, and the work that you're doing is great. So again, I mean, there's so many areas of this huge topic. But I think we've covered quite a bit today. We've given people quite a bit of food for thought to chew on for now. So why don't you tell people about where they can find you online, your new websites, and you have some social media links as well. Where can people find more from you if they want to learn more about the NAU from you?
Well, they can start off by going to NAU News, newz.org. That's our website, and it's something that we've just transferred over. I was running the NAUResistance.org website for many years, and decided to be more sort of focused on the current happenings of what's going on in the media and things like that, because let's face it, when our government's putting together these projects and media is invited, it's not people like you and me that typically get an invitation to find out, ourselves what's going on. So that is the focus of the new site, and anybody that would like information can go there. There's a NAU timeline that you can click on that will give you an idea of how this whole thing has progressed up until now. And we're also looking for any contributors out there that have taken on this topic and are concerned and like to write about it. We'll host the information at our site. So we're encouraging people that are interested and want to speak out on it. Speak out about it on our site. It's we're basically trying to create a site where everything and anything that has to do with North American Union consolidation, harmonization of our three countries can be found there in one convenient location. We can share ideas and talk about solutions there. Also on Facebook, I have a group called NAU Resistance Canada, mostly focusing for Canadians to go in there and sort of share information that they come across, because like we mentioned earlier, a lot of this stuff is happening and we're not even aware of it, even myself. So there's, I'll check the news and realize I missed something from 2 weeks ago, and it's still very relevant because a lot of these things aren't happening for 2-3 years down the road. So it still gives us a chance to expose it, to get the information out there, and to speak out on it. So those are the two main locations. Hit me up on Facebook, stop by the website. You can check out our YouTube channel under the same name, NAU Resistance. And I would encourage everybody again to pick up Dan's films. Press for Truth's films, United We Fall and Nation's Deathbed are two excellent examples of how this is all developing. And that's it. I just hope everybody checks it out, because it's very, very important. It's one of the biggest things that's going to happen in our lifetimes. And, heaven forbid we get to that point, we look back and say, I should have been more in tune to what was going on because I had no idea.
Exactly. History, it's all happening right now. Now is the time for people to get involved. You don't want to end up in this NAU agenda and look back and say, gosh, you know, when all this was going on and these guys were talking about these things, I just ignored it. You know, now is the time to get involved, and it's great that we have a central hub of NAU information, such as NAUnews.org. So that's fantastic. I would strongly encourage people, anyone out there, if you're interested in this topic, you write articles on this, you come across articles on this, send them over to Mike, post them on the Facebook wall, send them to him at his website. I'll put all links to all of these in the description for anybody who wants to check this out and learn more about the NAU agenda. And so, Mike, I want to thank you so much for taking some time today to talk about this huge topic. But again, it's of the utmost importance. So I appreciate you giving us this time today, man.
Anytime, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, man. All right, you take care.
Take care, Dan.